when you do that, and then you pick up the instrument, the sound is clear, the airspeed is wonderful, everything is great.
Welcome to the Bulletproof Musician Podcast, where you'll learn how to practice more effectively and perform better under pressure with insights from expert musicians and the latest research in performance psychology. The first thing I wanted to ask, if it's okay, is this idea of having a concept of sound. If I remember reading correctly, you had an early formative experience hearing Jean-Pierre Rampal at Lincoln Center, I think quite early on in your formative years. And so this is a phrase that I've heard, I feel like, particularly with wind players. And it's a concept I think that's important for, pianists, string players, brass players, like everybody, I think. But for whatever reason, my just anecdotal experience is that I've heard it more often in the context of wind playing. And I don't know if that really matters or not, but I do wonder if you could say a little bit about how important it might be to have a concept of sound to aim for, and maybe even a little bit about how important that may or may not have been in your own path.
It's a very interesting question. Basically, everything comes from the breath. So the concept of sound should sort of come organically. It involves your oral cavity, it involves head space, it involves opening the lungs. The way you breathe will determine your sound. The position of your tongue will have an impact on your sound. And my whole MO about sound is that it should be as fluid and organic as possible. And that's, I think, what I learned from Jean-Pierre Rampal. He would, basically from his lips to your ears to your heart. It would just be so direct. So there's nothing kind of manipulated or controlled, really.
I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the manipulation or the control, because I can maybe guess at what you mean by that. It reminds me of a phrase that I heard David Kim, the concertmaster in Philadelphia, say about listening to candidates and auditions, where there's this simple sort of musicality that he mentioned appreciating, and I didn't get to ask him further what the other type of expressive musicality might be, but I wonder if it's a similar sort of thing that you're describing as well.
You can find there are very many mannerisms people have and that are reflected in their sound. There are people that consistently start a sound without vibrato, for example, and then add it. And for me, that's a big no-no. And there are times when you don't want to use vibrato, or when you can use that as an expressive tool. But when I think of concept of sound, I think of just the general way that I produce my sound. And then, yes, if there are sounds I want to have kind of a nasty, gritty sound, then you can close your teeth. If you want to have something very fuzzy, you change the size of your aperture. Of course, there are ways to manipulate it, but for me, concept of sound is the general sound I make when I pick up my flute.
I wonder how one cultivates that or clarifies it, because I think I've had some conversations with students where they've heard that phrase come up in lessons and that's something that they've worked towards, but it's been not so easy necessarily to like latch on to the concept of sound that they've felt really convinced by or drawn to.
Sometimes I think the issue with students and sound is that people listen from here, from your mouth to the ears, and you need to be able to listen and to perceive what the sound is going to be like way out in a hall. And that is extremely difficult to do. Impossible, really, because you can't be in two places at the same time. This is one of the effects of COVID and all the Zoom lessons. After I saw people after a period of a year, I said, oh my God, your sound is so small. I didn't say that, but very compact, because they were playing for a microphone, playing for Zoom, and everything was clean and clear. So it was kind of missing the overtones and the things that you need for projection.
I wonder if you can say a little bit more about what is different in what you hear up close versus what you hear far away. I've heard musicians and orchestras even talk about soloists who they've played with, where they go out in the hall and listen and it sounds amazing. And then close up, if you're sitting in the first couple chairs near the soloist, they say, wow, this does not sound great at all. And then they're surprised to hear how different it is out there. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think I'm not, my sound is not as extreme close up as it is in the hall, but I also don't feel I have an enormous, I don't really have an orchestral sound that I'm just trying to cut over it. And, but there are people, you just feel a lot of kind of sizzle in the sound, um, and you kind of just kind of garbage around the sound that you do not hear when you get out in the hall, but up close. And the thing is, it bothers me up close. So I have a problem making that kind of sound.
Is this something that you need friends or colleagues to help you with, or is this something you could do with recording, or how does one figure out what they're aiming for when all they can hear up close is maybe not what the listener hears?
Right. I think it's friends and trusted friends and colleagues. Say when you're purchasing a flute and or trying out new head joints, you need to go into a big hall and you need to have people listen, because what you think sounds fantastic may not project at all in the hall, and something that you think is just sort of doesn't really resonate with you really resonates. So I think it's very tricky, that acoustic element, which we all have to deal with. But for me, sound is kind of a feeling. It feels like home. You feel settled, it feels grounded. And I think one of my um, things that I do have a kind of a special gift for is sensing what's going on inside a student's oral cavity. So I can hear the sound and just imagine what the tongue is doing, how the teeth are placed, and can make adjustments that way. And then you get that aha moment, like, wow, it's a completely different sound.
That sounds like a really useful skill to have, in the sense that I think it's something that I've heard a lot of folks struggle with, especially, wind or brass players, where it's not necessarily so apparent visually what's happening inside the mechanism of producing sound because you can't see it. Unlike, a pianist or a string player where you can see everything that's happening for the most part. Is that like, how does one cultivate that, or how did you come to become more adept at that particular skill?
I've always had an attention to sound, say, rather than words. Like, I really don't know the lyrics to any pop songs, for example. And I remember as early as kindergarten, when people would go around the room and have to read out loud, I could never pay attention to the storyline because I would always be kind of imagining what that person's voice felt like in my own mouth. I have that habit of just kind of like just feeling what the person's doing when someone speaks.
It sounded like an interesting sort of kinesthetic empathy that you have practiced for a long, long time, that I imagine you've gotten better and better at over the years with more experience and experimenting with students and so forth. Um, in terms of cultivating this concept of sound, is that something that comes with listening to more people live? Is it something that can happen with listening to more recordings? Because the recording itself and then the live performance, they're different. And I wonder if it matters at all. I mean, can listening to YouTube videos with the compression, it's a technology-based question, sort of, but how does one cultivate that, especially if you don't have access to lots of live flutists that may be around you? I mean, is it something that you can cultivate from listening to other instruments, perhaps, or maybe not at all?
Or voice in particular. I think voice is super helpful because you can just really feel and sense what's going on in the oral cavity. I think, recordings are incredibly, incredibly useful. That's how people to listen to music for most of the time now. Unfortunately, and even with the compression, I can kind of eliminate some of those things in my head. I can kind of just still perceive the sound. Recently, I was at an audition, and there was a Baroque flutist who played magnificently on traverso, and was also incredibly gifted on modern flute. But the whole approach to sound was that of a traverso player on modern flute, because the support was different, the speed of the air was different, the articulation was different, and the core was not kind of focus necessarily. Everything was kind of looser and lighter, and it was actually beautiful, very beautiful. But I noticed just how that person's body setup then was used on a different instrument was completely makes the instrument sound completely different.
Would it be helpful to listen to a wide range of different approaches, perhaps, in cultivating one's concept? Or, I mean, is it okay once you hear something that really captures your attention to just kind of lock in on that? Or is it maybe too narrow to start with?
I think listening to a variety of performers and sounds is definitely the way to go. I mean, if you're playing Baroque music, you'd be crazy not to listen to Baroque specialists. You may not want to emulate all of their, the Baroque technique and style that won't really translate well on modern flute, but it's good to sort of know about it and get a sense of what the music would have sounded like. So I think you need to find your own voice.
In terms of voice, is singing something that you have students do as well?
Absolutely. The first trick to improving one sound, getting a focus sound, and getting the vibrato in place is to sing and play simultaneously. That it automatically addresses the issue. So singing and playing, and also fluttering and playing, flutter tongue, will you flutter the phrase and then you play it and everything's in place because the aperture and the airspeed are just so. And I learned this actually. I have a rather hoarse voice because I guess it's some element of long COVID. I have a semi-paralyzed vocal cord. I guess I coughed for about 8 months or something. I don't know what did it. But I decided to go and see the head of the Sean Parker Vocal Institute at Weill Cornell. And he does the scope. And that's when it was determined that one vocal cord does very well and the other one just sits there. And the next time I came back, I said, would you mind if I played for you while I have the scope down just to see what's happening? And he said, yes, you're the first person to do that. So he brought in all the other people in the office to see. And lo and behold, when I played, one chord was going, the other chord not. But when I would sing and play simultaneously, beautiful. So now I have to do that all the time in order to make sure my sound is in the right kind of zone.
So when you initially said sing and play, I thought there was some metaphor there. But do you mean literally singing and playing?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. It's considered an extended technique, but it's pretty standard now. You don't actually have to vocal tuning, they call it. You don't actually have to sing in tune. It's better if you do, but I don't have a particularly good voice for singing, but the action of producing the sound while blowing will get everything right in the right spot, as does buzzing. You think flutists shouldn't buzz. We don't buzz, not when you play, but when you do that, and then you pick up the instrument, the sound is clear, the airspeed is wonderful, everything is great. Except it's really hard to say, excuse me, while I buzz before I start this piece,
Right. That's really interesting. So just to make sure, this is not something I need to ask further about. Flutists will understand this, and this is just sort of the ignorance of having a violin background.
They might not understand the buzzing because I don't really understand the buzzing either. Except what I find is that the problem I sense when I hear someone play, oftentimes the issue is the air is too slow. And telling someone to speed up the air doesn't necessarily do the trick. So this action will automatically speed up the air and get the aperture small enough to have that ratio just so. And it tends to work. So, but a lot of people have trouble buzzing if they're not brass players. Can you buzz?
No, with the singing while playing, Do you get the impression from your own experience of it that there's any perhaps mental benefit of that as well in terms of attention and focus? Or is it purely a physical thing, do you think?
For me, it's definitely a physical thing, and it's being able to do the two things simultaneously, to blow and sing. You can practice it without the instrument. Ooh, you have to get the balance right, so you have the same amount of voice as you do sound.
This makes me think of something that may be tangentially related, but is there any value in emulating different instruments or having different instruments in mind while playing? Or is it distracting perhaps to do something like that? Or maybe it's really just related to the concept of sound idea.
It is related to the concept of sound idea. For example, if you're playing a transcription of Afternoon of a Faun, you want to sound like the oboe, you want to sound like the horn. You need to be able to change your color of your sound.
And maybe this is related to color and perhaps not, but I know one of the exercises I have students do sometimes involves emulating very different types of performers with different approaches. And that's often actually more from a motor skill development perspective. But is that something that might have value from a concept of sound perspective as well, emulating very different types of sounds and performers?
I think so. It goes back to the feeling of the sound in your mouth. How does that person get kind of a really nasal sound? What do you have to do? Are the teeth closed? Is there very little? Is the roof flattened? Or if somebody has a very unfocused sound, is the airspeed sluggish? Is the embouchure aperture not small enough? How to make that. So I think exploring with those things will allow you then to develop your colors.
Is this the sort of thing that you might have done when you were younger or even as a kid to cultivate that sort of kinesthetic empathy, I think we're going to call it perhaps?
It was not something that I was cognizant of doing, other than never paying attention when people were reading in class. And even to this day, I mean, I've had an experience where we belonged to a synagogue, and there was a wonderful cantor who was the old-fashioned kind of singing. And then she moved on, and they hired a young cantor who didn't really have a classically trained voice. And to my ear, her intonation was a little bit problematic, and she was kind of pressing. So I couldn't actually go to a service and like pray or enjoy the service. I was like teaching in my mind. Raise your roof, open your, drop your jaw, and I said, I just can't do this anymore. So that's just my own thing.
This might take us slightly away from that a little bit, but hopefully it's still related. I'm curious about this idea of recording and listening back and maybe using that as a way to cultivate a clear sense of what one's goal or target is as well. But I remember reading somewhere, I believe, an interview that you did where you had talked about how you're not sure that students often know exactly what to listen for. And I wonder if you can elaborate on that a little bit and say more what you might have meant.
First of all, it's very difficult to listen to oneself. And you have to initially get over that. Just like looking in the mirror, it's like you could see what you want to see, or looking at a photograph, So you need to first get accustomed to the sound, and also to realize if you're recording on your phone, it's not going to be an accurate representation of what your sound is, and it's an approximation. It's compressed, but it just gives you some idea. And I think the one thing you really can't work on you can't work on sound when you're dealing with iPhone recordings. There are many, many other things you can do. So it's kind of a process. When a student comes to me and they have to play the Mozart concerto, which they're going to do for an audition, and it's going to be the first thing they play. So I listen to the opening phrase of the Mozart G major, and I hear things that need to be addressed. So I'll have the student just record, and it's 10 seconds or less, the opening 4 measures. And then we play it back and listen together. And I say, what do you hear? Generally, I don't like the way I sound. It's not clear, or I'm not steady, or it's whatever it is. Also, what people tend to hear is what they tend to focus on in their practice, and generally what they do best. That's what they focus on. So when they listen back, that's what they're focusing on. So if someone is really not paying attention to evenness of technique, I'll say, let's just listen back and just focus on dia da da dia da dia da dia da da dia da dia da dia da dia da da. Let's just focus on that passage. Let's listen back. What can you tell me about that in a very, very specific way? Oh, it's not even. Okay, let's get even more specific. What's not even? Because you're dealing with 2 slurs and 2 tongues, 2 slurs and 2 tongues. Well, the tongues are rushing, or the sound quality is not the same between the tongue and the slurs. You try to get that kind of awareness. And I'll say, okay, let's think about that for a second. We can even just try blowing the air. Or just blow. And now let's play it again, just that measure, and see what it sounds like. And they'll play it, and I said, let's play it back. It's kind of fixed. So you could be practicing hours and weeks and months. So it's just kind of the awareness. But how does one get that awareness other than through noticing, paying attention, questioning? No, we don't like to do those things. It's not fun. But when, then I'll say, let's look at the first measure. Dee, da, 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 dee. I hear dee, da, 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 dee, da. What can you tell me about the articulation in that first measure? Are the notes the same length? Is one or another one longer than the other? What about the dotted eighth and 16th? Is it really a dotted eighth and 16th? Or is it an eighth note with the rest? Da, da, da. Just to notice it. Maybe you want it that way, but know what you're doing. So we'll go over that and let's record it. And then this whole thing, we're dealing with 10 seconds of music. So I'll say, okay, let's just do one other thing. Let's play and sing simultaneously once. Okay, now let's record. And now listen back. And let's listen back to the first one you did. And it's night and day. Very satisfying as a teacher. And very, students are happy. It's a real aha moment. I said, because you can do it, that means you can do it here, you can do it. It's within your realm, you know how to do it now.
It sounds like part of this is identifying what our blind spots are, perhaps, in terms of what's happening, but we're not necessarily noticing or focusing on or hearing, or maybe even seeing in the case of watching video sometimes. Is there a way for us to get better at knowing where our blind spots are? I mean, is that where we just need others who are more experienced than us to kind of help clue us into those, or is there a way to discover them on our own, perhaps?
Well, I have a checklist, which is quite elaborate, just using cell phone, not even with a separate mic, just everyday audio and video. So you you play the first phrase, you notice ideally something you can tolerate about yourself. You don't have to love it, but something that is acceptable. And then jot down some thoughts or just say them. And then you're going to listen for any choice of things. You can listen for note accuracy. Does anything need more detailed work? Did some notes crack? Finger technique. Are there awkward passages that need more attention? Tempo, rushing or dragging, rhythm, which can be subjective, but my feeling is always go for rhythmic integrity first. I went to the Paris Conservatory, so we did an unbelievable amount of subdivision in solfege and sight reading. like, so I cannot not subdivide. So making subdivision your best friend, and then you'll say to me, well, there's a rubato here. I said, fine, that we can deal with the rubato or ritardando, whatever it is. Let's just see what the basic rhythm is. Let's get that in place, and then we can address. Articulation, lengths of notes. Are they consistent? Do you want them to be consistent? And one other thing about articulation that people tend to have problems with, people have the tongue is too heavy. The tongue is doing the bulk of the work. So removing the tongue from the equation and just doing ho, ho, ho body work, playing everything without the tongue, making the sound without the tongue, and then adding 5%, 10% tongue. So the tongue can still flap very, very lightly, and you have a lot of core in the sound. Because I don't know if you've noticed, people play sometimes the legato portion is very clear, and the articulated stuff seems a little bit muffled. So there are ways to address that. Then the big issue with flute playing is breathing. Am I gasping? Do I need, before I play Mozart, do I need to hear the first breath? Does it serve any purpose? Where are you breathing? Are you holding your breath? Da, da. That all will affect your sound. So just notice what you're doing. Intonation, of course. And I love Tunable, the app. Do you know Tunable? Or do you work with tonal energy?
I've had students who use both, yeah.
Well, so Tunable is, I find, quite a remarkable tool. I should have stock in the company because you can play and you can see where you are. I recommend using Tunable on a very not sensitive setting because you don't want to be playing notes, intonation. You want sort of general ballpark of intonation. But you can have a drone fact there, so you can play with the drone, check your intonation. But it does have this capability to record, and then it judges you, and it tells you 78%, you're almost there, or 18%. You can do, in tune. And it says exactly how many seconds you played, how many seconds in tune, and what percentage out of tune you were. And you can do analysis and go back and look at your phrase and see exactly where you're out of tune. I find that just so fascinating because generally you learn then that the problem is not the note you think is the problem. It's generally the note before it and how you prepare for the note that's coming. So that's something that you can notice when you're using your recording device. And then, of course, the video component. I did a whole thing on tone bass. Do you know tone bass? Yeah. And I talked about articulation and using the mirror, having a mirror on your stand, even a magnifying mirror. So you want to look at your lips and play legato. Nothing's happening. Now, when you double tongue, what is happening? Does it still look the same, or are you chewing? And you want to be able to just remove that variable of every time you move your mouth, you're kind of going to affect your sound. So you want to just keep it the same without having to. So that's a video exercise. And you'll see it. Yes, I'm chewing or I'm not chewing. And you can kind of address it. Look at your hands and arms. Am I moving forward and down every time I take a breath? Am I doing this? Am I, any kind of just general things that you might not notice? And you can look at that and make an assessment. So then you can say, again, we're dealing with 10 seconds. What's good? What do you want to keep? Or what do you want to change? And how might you go about changing it? But it's just like a baseline you have, which you can go and refer to. So this is for detailed stuff when you have time to really, you don't know what you have to practice and you really want to explore, or you're just not sure what's what. You think it's not, it could be better, but I don't know what to do. I think that in many ways was my problem as a practicer. You don't know when to stop. You don't know when, like, what are you getting done? What's the goal of your practice? There's nothing. It seems so intangible. But I find with this, that you actually have something to say, okay, this is where I'm at today with this. And then I can put it aside.
I don't know if there's an easy, simple answer to this or not, but like, how do you know when something is, quote, good enough to then move on? I mean, is it a matter of time and just limitations? Or, I mean, is there like a good enough point that you can determine?
It's very, very hard. And I think this is coming up a lot because more and more auditions now are having to be done virtually, a video in one take. And it could be as much as 15 minutes of music in one take. And you're doing great. You get through all this, and then the last excerpt, you kind of mess up. What do you do? Because the idea of having it be in perfect 20 minutes, I mean, it's just, how many times can you do it a day? Of course, you don't want to do the recording the day before it's due. You want to give yourself some time. But at some point, you're going to have to say, I'm going to hedge my bet and think that they're not going to listen all the way through to the end of this recording. However, I want to make sure that that first 30 seconds is just so. And I've heard many recordings where the first 30 seconds are people crack or something. I'd say, why did you send that? Because it really makes that first impression. So I think you have to be able to say, this is where I am now, February 21st, 2025, this is what I can do. And you're going to have to, in a way, live with it. It's frustrating.
In terms of the recording too, you mentioned color earlier and that being a difficult thing to work on, perhaps. Like how does one record oneself in order to be able to then work on some of these nuances and differences that may sound very different to the listener than it might to us under our own ear or with a recording device that's near us?
So I think placement of the microphone is going to be very important because we talk about this in class. You know, how do you make an at-home recording and sound your best? You know, which is different than practicing with a recording device. And as I mentioned, when I'm practicing with my phone recording, I'm not working on sound. I'm working on technique, articulation, breathing, other things, intonation. But when you have to make a recording, you don't want to have the microphone so close to your mouth or your flute. You can have it further out in the room because they're going to, in a projected sound, they're going to be overtones.
Is this the sort of thing that over time you start to understand, oh, if it sounds like this up close, it sounds like X or Y out there? Or is it always something that you need some help with to try to be able to gauge?
I think you're playing in different halls all the time. If you're at David Geffen Hall every time, you'll know what you need to do with your sound in order to get it to the back. But if you're one day in a church and one day in a super dry auditorium, and it's a guessing game, and you just have to get a sense of when it's worth it to try to push, and when you have no control over the sound quality in the room, and pushing is not going to be effective. That's just sheer experience, and just doing it enough times to make a decision.
That sounds like the sort of thing that would make auditioning particularly challenging, perhaps, where you don't really have much of an opportunity to test out a hall or to find out what's working or what's not. How do you advise students to be able to have that sort of flexibility, or even just to make those guesses or gauge in that moment?
That's again, it's experience. I had a student recently do a piccolo audition, and she said, I was so shocked by the first note I made in this huge hall. that I just wasn't. I've been practicing in, in a practice room, but also in smaller halls at school, but not in a big venue. And she just said it felt so odd that I felt like I was just not giving enough and not supporting enough, and I just didn't know what. So I think it's having the experience of doing it, and I think now she can now imagine if you're in that kind of venue. I mean, ideally, you should try to get experience if you're in a big hall for an orchestra rehearsal and you get there 20 minutes early. Perhaps you can try it out yourself. But it's those are the intangibles, I think.
Aside from trying to play in bigger halls whenever you get the opportunity in bigger spaces, does this have any ramifications for how one approaches practicing on a day-to-day basis in terms of what the goal might be even in a smaller space?
Yes and no. I mean, I think you have to have your support engaged. I think it's very tempting, and I think this is what happened a lot during COVID, is that you're playing just so you can play clean and slightly weak, and it's okay over Zoom, but it just is not going to fly in even in a small hall. So you just have to remember to engage and practice that and practice the core work. I mean, there are exercises for that to make sure you're just not also just playing on autopilot. I think autopilot's the worst thing ever. I'm sure you agree.
Yeah, I was tempted to stop at one point and follow up on something, and I want to do that now before I forget, because the phrase just sort of piqued my interest, and I'm wondering if we can talk about it a little bit more. You mentioned subdividing, but also this phrase rhythmic integrity, and I assume that has nothing to do with like metronomic precision, but something more perhaps to do with phrasing and the arc of direction in whatever it is that you're playing. Can you say more about what that is, first off, and then like how does one practice that, or how does one use that in performance or in one's playing?
I went to the Paris Conservatory and I did hours and hours and hours of solfege, rhythmic solfege, sight reading, and subdivide, subdivide, subdivide. Um, and I can sense and feel when someone's not subdividing. I don't want to hear it, but you can just know, having done it my whole life, and now I cannot stop subdividing. So I think when I have a rhythm, I want to make sure it's all in place. So I really want to hear the distinction between a dotted eighth and a 16th and and triplets. And I want four notes in the 16th notes to be even and to be spaced appropriately and not have them be compressed because of articulation or any other reason. So basically, just to have this kind of baseline of everything is in place. And then you can say, okay, but then how do I make it not sound metronomic? Because then you'll say, yes, you're dee-da, every note is accentuated. How do I get it to flow but still maintain correct rhythm? I think that's rhythmic. You keep the rhythmic integrity, but then you can be free to make a rubato or to move something forward if you know where it is in space in the first place. So I think that's just a real skill that's worth having, but not stopping with the metronome. That's not the be all and end all. I don't ever.
Can you say more about how one might practice cultivating that skill? I mean, does it happen with the metronome or without the metronome? How does one get better at that?
I say that without the metronome. So if someone's playing a phrase and we'll play it back and it sounds like I'm hearing the eighth note, every single eighth note, it's very vertical. Okay, what can I do to have it move linearly? Okay, what am I doing on those notes with my vibrato that makes it sound vertical? What am I doing with my fingers? Am I accenting the note with my fingers or with an extra hard tongue? How can I just let it go and let it sort of float. And then you just have to play it back. And sometimes your sense is really just wrong about the direction. You sort of have to have an idea of the direction of the phrase you want. But again, it's experimentation and play and trial and error. But there's, all rhythms and all notes are not created equal. So, what value does that rhythm have? What's the purpose of that rhythm in that phrase? Is it to propel something forward, or is it to sort of pull something back, like quarter note triplets or something? And how do I think about that?
Yeah, and when you say subdivide, is it solfege? Is it numbers? How do you feel it internally?
I don't do numbers or solfege, but da 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 da. I just will break it down and figure out where the notes are in relation to the beat.
Is it something that you practice away from the flute, maybe even vocalizing out loud, or?
Absolutely, and I have the students do it too. I mean, that's the kind of thing where forget about the instrument. There are too many things. You have to think about too many things at the same time. Let's just work on the rhythm and see if we can just get the rhythm in place. And then what's happening when you play that kind of distorts or obscures the rhythm, So then you want to make sure that you have an understanding of the rhythm. That is the baseline. And then you can kind of figure out if you're doing anything that gets in the way of the rhythm.
All of these strategies sound incredibly engrossing and valuable and useful. And I know that you also, I think, a little bit ago mentioned how this may require a certain amount of bandwidth or time in order to be able to delve into this level of detail. Because one of the questions I often get from not just students, but professionals as well is where to find the time and how to balance priorities, not just in one's repertoire, but even in one's life, teaching, directing music festivals as you do, and having other obligations with family. But then even in one's own professional life, there are responsibilities for your job if you play in an orchestra, chamber music performances you're doing with colleagues. If you're taking auditions, there's that whole additional pile of music that needs to be learned and perfected and so forth. How do you help students and other folks balance all those different repertoire demands and figure out what to spend time on and maybe more importantly, like what not to spend so much time on?
So time management and prioritizing are key. And it's extremely tempting to work on the difficult passages excessively, and you end up like banging your head against the wall. It does not get better, but you can't give it up. You're just tenacious. You just will not. So I have found an approach. This was a student who unexpectedly won a competition. She was an excellent flutist, but she never thought she was going to get first prize. And the prize was to play a full recital, like in a month. And it was like, all these pieces. How do I manage practicing all of these pieces? So first of all, you can count the 28 days. Okay, you have 28 days. You have a chart, 28 days. You break everything down, all of your music down into, first of all, if you're working with pieces, movements, and even more than that, just pages or measure numbers, and for that particular movement, and then you make assessments. Is this easy for me? Is it relatively somewhat difficult but manageable, or is this just really nightmarish? And you can make a card, or you can color code. I don't know if I had this piece that I'm working on that is was just given to me. We have a performance. It's a faculty recital, and I wasn't expecting it, and it's ridiculously difficult. So I tried my own approach of, and I just was looking at it and said, I don't really feel like learning this. It's just too much, too hard, too many pages, and sort of like, first of all, it's like, I don't want to. you know? And then, okay, well, then what are you going to do? So then you can break it down, and you can, when you look at it, you say, okay, this opening passage has a lot of extended techniques. It's completely solo, and I need to nail that. So that's a difficult passage. I put that in red. Here I have nice quarter notes and a whole note. Very nice, easy. That's green. And then we have a passage that's in yellow, which is somewhat technical, but kind of scale passages. It's very manageable. It needs work to get up to speed, but it's manageable. And so I will mark all of my music that way, and I'll say, okay, right now I have half an hour before I have a lesson. Let me see what I can get done. So with the half an hour, I'll divide it up. I'll spend 10 minutes on the medium stuff. This page doesn't have a lot of medium stuff. I'll just do the medium stuff. And then I'll spend the bulk of it on the hard stuff. And then I'll end with something easy so I can like hold my head up and say, yes, I can play the flute, even though, I can't play this piece yet. So the beauty of doing this with the iPad now is that you can just change your colors. All of a sudden, the red becomes a yellow, right? The yellow becomes a green, and it's very satisfying. But of course, you do not want to have your colored marking in your music when you're performing. You just should have a blank page. You can have your cues, you can have your breath marks, certain subdivisions you need to remind yourself of, but not this. This is practice.
How do you have the patience or the trust in yourself to trust the process, as it were? Because I think sometimes, you can be 3 weeks out or 2 weeks out and you see an awful lot of red or orange, perhaps, and not as much green as you would have hoped to at that point. Do you have any suggestions on how to avoid panicking too much in advance?
I panic. I do. It's, the slow going, break it down, tiny bites. Do not do the entire red passage. Break that red passage down. Maybe a portion of that red passage is already yellow, Really isolate what the issue is and then figure out what you need to do to address it. And in this one example, there's a notation issue. The notes are, let's see, F, F sharp, F natural, or there's one F, E sharp, F sharp. So the E and the E sharp, and then an F, So I just can't get my head around that. So I have to sometimes rewrite it and certainly regroup it. So basically I'm saying I'm playing 2 octaves, E, E, F, F, or F, F, F sharp, F sharp. But if I try to, and it's all 3 different octaves, so do, E, oh, and if I try to do it in one take, it's just never going to happen. So you just have to break it down. And again, if you don't have time, put your timer on and give it X number of minutes or whatever. And then you have the 3 tries. You say, okay, I'm going to try it 3 times at this tempo. If I can't do it, I'm putting it away until tomorrow. Well, I'm also slowing down the tempo a lot. I think people also jump. They do the slow tempo and then it jumps too fast to a faster tempo. So I'm not the person that will go 60, 63, 60. If I can do it, I don't need to do that. It's when I really need to pay attention that I do it. But it's very frustrating. What can I tell you?
Well, I think it's good to hear that even someone like yourself has those moments of panic and frustration and so forth. Because I think sometimes when we see our teachers or performers we look up to display the finished product, as it were, I think they don't necessarily see it as finished in the way that we might think that it is. And B, I think we don't see what happens behind the scenes and we assume that it was a straightforward, simple process. So, the one last question I want to ask before I know you have to move on to some other things is this idea of having a clean copy to perform off of. I sometimes get questions about, well, like how clean should that copy be? Or like how much in advance should I create that copy so that I'm not surprised by something that I see or the lack of something when I see it on stage at the performance? Any suggestions on like how to manage that process?
Well, first of all, if you're using paper and not an iPad, make sure your turns, your music is taped and your turns are organized. I can't tell you how many times I say, please do not come to your lesson with your music untaped. And then they don't do it until the day of the concert, or that never, and the pages fly all over the place. Or using your pedal, practicing. That's a whole nother element that's added to the equation, using your pedal, if you were using your iPad. So, I think people use the same music for year in, year out, and they have so many layers of commentary from different teachers. So I think you need to say, what is essential? What do I need to see in this music? I will certainly mark my cues. Here I'm playing with this person. The piano is playing this underneath me. I'll have all of those kind of cues in. Often I really love to play with the score as much as possible, but I'm not a good peddler with my iPad because I get too excited and I press too hard and turn multiple pages. So, but I love playing off the score because you get all that information. You want to highlight your certain dynamics that you want to make sure come across. You want to notate certain breaths that are really important. This one has to be an incredibly big breath. This can be just a catch breath. Those kinds of things you want to keep in your music. But all the details and suggestions given to you by your teacher at lessons may not be useful. It's just, I find very distracting personally.